Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Pulls Pod following the start of the new season. Yeovil away last Saturday, a nil-nil draw, which, to be fair, going to the West Country, it's always a solid point if you can bring one back, and we can build from there. One person who was there last Saturday was Robbie Stelling of the Hartlepool Mail, who joins me this week. Hello, Robbie, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Jack. Thanks so much for having me on. It's good to be back and great to have the new season back as well. And obviously, plenty to talk about. It's been a quiet few weeks, hasn't it?
Well, it'd be nice if it had been a quiet few weeks because, I mean, there wouldn't be much to talk about on here, but unfortunately, there's been a lot going on for yourself, for your dad, Jeff Stelling, as well, and just in general around the media of the club as well. With regards to yourself, with regards to Rob Law, it's been very well documented in the public domain. I won't go over it again because, we all know what's happened pretty much. So we'll crack on with the game against Yeovil last Saturday. A fairly solid nil-nil draw, and speaking on the radio, you seem quite impressed with how the players performed, certainly those on debut as well.
Yeah, it was good. I wouldn't say it was any better than good. As you said, it was a solid point. I think that's what Simon Grayson said. He said it was a solid starting point. Never lost to Yeovil in his managerial career. Never lost during his first game in charge of a new side either. So he was able to maintain those records. I think it was solid, but it was a bit unspectacular. I think there was plenty of optimism, and there still is, of course, plenty of optimism going into this season. But I got the sense among Pools fans that, especially over the last few weeks, some of the recruitment had been so impressive that Pools fans really felt that they could win on Saturday. But that's a sign of how strong the recruitment looks to have been. I think at National League level, to an extent, it's always a little bit of an unknown, isn't it? You're never quite sure what you're getting with some of these players. Obviously, we don't watch them as frequently. We tend to see them come up against Pools. I know that Joe Monks works really hard to watch a lot of games. I know that Simon Grayson obviously is a vastly experienced manager. Of course, he's never managed in the National League, but his son Joe, as he's pointed out, has spent the last 2 years at Gateshead. He's not altogether unfamiliar with the division, and I'm sure he has a really long list of contacts and people that he trusts. I actually felt that Pools would really struggle this summer in terms of recruitment. I thought that the reputational damage that they'd suffered in the wake of the takeover debacle, if you like, I thought that that would make it difficult to recruit players. We often say that it's difficult to recruit players to Hartlepool United because of the geography of it. Pools have obviously tried to focus on a more northeast based approach over the last couple of years, particularly the previous summer under Darren Sarll. That worked well to an extent, but obviously I think there were some issues with the fact that they weren't willing to branch out at times. I think this summer they've got a nice balance, and I think it's telling that Pools have lost Manny Disarue and Joe Gray, two of their best players. I think you would say Manny Disarue was their best player, certainly their most valuable asset. But most Pools fans, I think, if you spoke to them, would probably say that this current squad going into the new season is stronger, potentially significantly stronger than the one that finished last season. Albeit they had a number of injuries towards the end of the campaign as well. So there's certainly positivity and optimism, and I think there's still positivity after Saturday's game. Pools, I felt, controlled large parts of the first half. Yeovil were very poor in the first half, I have to say. I think that they've had ownership issues of their own. Obviously, Prabu Srinivasan, Dubai-based entrepreneur, bought the club from Martin Hellier, who caused his fair share of problems during his stormy 3-year stay in charge of the Glovers. He bought the club in May. I think one of the first things they did was move the training ground. They relocated from outside of the town of Yeovil. I think Mark Cooper felt that the artificial surface they had been training on had been leading to too many injuries. That subsequently, I think, ate into some of their transfer budget. And I think they're a few players short. If I had to guess, I'd put them somewhere between 12th and 16th this season. Obviously, a lot can change over the next few weeks. So from that sense, Pools maybe might feel as though it's ever so slightly a missed opportunity. As I say, they controlled the game for large parts of the first half. I thought they were at their best when they were brave with their passing, when they went through Jamie Minley. He's a player I know a lot of Pools fans, myself included, are a big fan of and are perhaps backing to have a really strong season. But they probably didn't do that often enough. I don't think they were prepared to break the lines and take risks sometimes with their passing as often as they might have been, because a lot of their best moves came from those sort of positions and those sorts of passages of play. In the second half, Yeovil came on much stronger, particularly the first 10 or 15 minutes. Harvey Cartwright, who I was really impressed with. It's never easy to make a debut as a goalkeeper. Certainly not when you've only trained with your new side twice. I thought Simon Grayson might put Adam Smith in on Saturday and just try and ease Cartwright into it. But he was really up to the task, made a number of really good saves. James Daly, Charlie Cooper, Ben Woodscoon late on as well, and commanded his area. That's what I really liked about him. How often do you see these young goalkeepers that tend to be a little bit tentative? They're more inclined to stay on their line, but Cartwright used his size and he asserted himself really well. Obviously, had a good loan spell at Grimsby as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. Though, as Simon Grayson said, we don't want to be talking about him too much. Pools, I think, gave as good as they got in the second half. Felt Yeovil shaded it. In truth, they did have opportunities, though. Both Alex Reid and Danny Johnson forced saves from Jed Ward, who's another goalkeeper I really like, just arrived on loan from Bristol Rovers. I watched him actually in my first journalism job when I was covering the mighty Hungerford Town. He spent a year on loan there, and he was absolutely fantastic. So I was pleased to see him have a good game as well, although I, of course, would have liked to see Pools get one past him. I think all in all, a draw was about fair. It's probably not a game that's going to live long in the memory, but as you were saying, Jack, before we came on to record this, it is a really long trek, isn't it? I think it's about 343 miles one way. I think it took Pools about 7.5 hours to get down there on the Friday. They obviously missed the chance to train. They had been planning to train at Millfield School in Somerset, but the traffic put paid to that. That potentially meant that the preparations were less than ideal. So all things considered, it was a reasonable point. I think Pools have got a favourable start. If you look at the fixtures, the first 6-8 games, they obviously have to play Southend over the bank holiday. I think that's going to be a tricky one, but they've got plenty of winnable games. You look at this first 3 at home, Braintree, albeit they're going to arrive at Victoria Park top of the table after a bit of a statement win over Halifax. Then they've got Woking, and then they've got newly promoted Boreham Wood. Those are 3 winnable games. It's important that Pools start well. It often feels like they're only 3 or 4 bad results away from a crisis, but I think they've got every chance of starting well, and it was a decent starting point last Saturday.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned there, Braintree coming to the Prestige Group Stadium on Saturday. A fairly surprising result, I think it's fair to say. I don't think anyone has Halifax down potentially as like world beaters this season, but I also don't think anyone expected Braintree to win by 3 goals on Saturday. So a surprising leader going into Saturday of the league. But as you said, it's very... I don't think it's past anyone to say that we should really be taking advantage of our home fixtures. Certainly this month, if you look at Braintree, Woking and Boreham Wood.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I'm sure not many people will be taking too much notice of the National League table after the opening round of fixtures. It's probably only Braintree fans, actually, to be fair, because that really was a fantastic result for them. I don't fancy Halifax to do particularly well this year, as you sort of alluded to, Jack. They obviously lost Chris Millington, who was I think, really integral to their success. I think in many ways, actually, they've punched above their weight. They're obviously historically a club that have been in and around this level or even higher, but I think the budget that they have, I think some of the conditions that they've had to work under, they've obviously had massive issues with their pitch over the last couple of years. They share it with Halifax Panthers, the rugby league team. When Pools went there in March, the pitch was in a real state. It was barely playable in truth. So they've obviously had to focus on that over the summer. And I think in Chris Millington, they've lost a really good manager who I think was perfectly suited to the sort of difficult circumstances often that he had to operate under. So it's going to be interesting to see how they get on. Obviously finished 7th last season, didn't they? I'd be amazed if they were in the playoffs again this year. Of course, it's a long season. They've had a bad start. Braintree, I'm a big admirer of their manager, Steve Pitt, as well. Replaced Angelo Harrop, I think, in December when they were 19th and just 1 point above the relegation zone. Again, one of the smaller budgets in the league, one of the historically smaller clubs in the league as well. They have to cut their cloth accordingly. They lost Cairo Lisby over the summer. I think he was probably their standout player last year. Scored 13 or 14 goals, gone to Peterborough over the summer. I think that's potentially a sign of Braintree's successful recruitment. Of course, they won't relish the prospect of losing some of their best players, but I think they took him from Cray Valley Paper Mills or somewhere like that, plucked him from relative footballing obscurity with all due respect, and he went on to really shine and has obviously commanded a decent fee. And of course, Jermaine Francis as well, former current Pools man. Sorry, looking forward to facing off against his former club. He had a really successful loan spell there and caught the eye against Pools, of course, scored that goal when the two sides met in February. So while I am a big fan of Steve Pitt and while I'm certainly impressed by their opening day result, I think survival would constitute success again for Braintree. I think if you spoke to most Braintree fans and you said you're going to be fifth or sixth bottom this term, they would probably take that. It's a long trip for them, of course. And for Pools, it's so important they need to improve that home record. I mean, it's such a cliched thing to say, isn't it? But we know, especially that season when Pools got back into the Football League after the COVID restrictions were completely lifted, we know how much of a difficult place to come Victoria Park can be. I remember there were times that season, it really felt like the atmosphere was so red hot. It was almost impossible for Pools to lose the game of football. I remember when they beat Carlisle 2-1 in August, when they came from 2 goals down to beat Harrogate 3-2. The fans were such a massive asset. But as Darren Sarll found out last year, if things don't go well at the start, it can be very difficult. The fans will get on the players' backs. They'll certainly get on the managers' back as well, albeit Sarll certainly didn't help himself with some of his comments made in the press and is generally quite adversarial style of doing things. But it's really important. Simon Grayson, I think, is very level-headed. He's very measured. He's not going to go around saying things that are massively controversial. I think he recognizes the importance of the Pools fans. But obviously, given the controversial nature of the last few months, I think it's really important that Pools do start well, especially given, as you said, Jack, they've got some fairly favourable fixtures. So I think Braintree will arrive inevitably full of confidence, given the fact that they produced probably the result of the weekend, didn't they, to dispense with Halifax. But it's a game. I think if Pools are serious about challenging for the playoffs, and Simon Grayson has sort of said that if Pools don't finish in the playoffs, that can be constituted as a failure. He wrote off last year's 11th place finish as a failure. So if Pools are really serious about that, they need to win their home games. They certainly need to win their home games against sides that, with all due respect, you would imagine would finish in the bottom half this season. I think Braintree are one of those. And the sooner the Pools can get the ball rolling in terms of starting winning games, absolutely the better. So it's a big game in many ways, and I think it's one that Pools, even at this early stage in the season, Pools will feel they need to win.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there about, we'll start with Halifax. The manager, Adam Lakeland, coming in from Kingsland Town after he was removed from the post. Very strange that you see a manager be removed from a post in one league and then move up a league for his next one. And I think about Adam Millington, clearly he's got something about him to get Halifax up into the playoffs. But there were a lot of Halifax fans last season, in particular when we beat them by 1-0 at the Share, who were quite scathing, shall we say, of his home tactics. They said that the goals were in very short supply at home. He said that they didn't really look to go forward at that point. I mean, we can't say for sure whether it's changed. Neither of us watched the game, but obviously looking at the result where they haven't been able to score past Braintree and they've lost by 3-0, they certainly do need to improve if they want to be anywhere near the playoffs this season, let alone challenging for the playoffs. And as for Braintree, as you said before, Kyra Lisby going to Peterborough. He did come from Cray Valley Paper Mills, and I mean, Peterborough specifically, they love a non-league signing, don't they? We've seen it many times in the past where Darren McAntony has always said, he looks for value in this league, he looks for value in the leagues below as well, and takes them on, packages them up, and then sells them on as and when he can. You look at the likes of Ivan Toney as one of the main examples of that in recent years. And, I think you are right in saying that, unfortunately for Braintree, their budget will limit them quite a bit in this division. It may not exclude them from moving on and moving up, as it were. But yeah, I think, we should really be beating these teams if we have any hopes of getting into the playoffs. As Simon Grayson has said, it is our aim. It should always be our aim. Even if we're coming off the back of a 20th place finish, it should always be the aim to be looking at the top end of the division, despite all of the teams that could be up there, which leads us seamlessly onto the top end of the National League. Yeah, as and when we play teams such as York, Carlisle, Southend, Rochdale, I think many people would agree they'd be up the top end of the table. And with the extra spice of games such as, your Yorks, your Carlisles, etc. as well, the chances are, if we get into the playoffs, we'll be playing at least one of those teams, at least three of those teams, providing that one of them wins the league. And, can you see Pools mixing it with those teams if they are able to get a top 7 finish? Because the likelihood is, unless we have a really good season and finish sort of in the second, third bracket, we'll probably be away to those teams in the playoffs, which will be extremely difficult.
Well, I would say over the course of a 46-game season, I think Pools will struggle to mix it with those teams. I think they'll struggle certainly to stay the course. Those four teams that you named, York, Carlisle, Rochdale, and Southend, they'd be my top four for this season. I think York are going to take some beating, aren't they? Obviously, didn't have the best start to the season. Drew 2-2 against a Sutton side who would maybe be my tip as outsiders. Didn't have a sensational season on their return to the National League under Steve Morrison, and they've had a big overhaul of players over the summer. But I'm not sure that there are too many outstanding candidates to make a break from mid-table. I quite like the look of Eastleigh, but they've lost Tyrese Shade. I think that's going to be a big blow for them. I think they've recruited well in other areas. I like Kelvin Davis. I think he's a good man who's done a pretty decent job there as well. But Sutton might be the one who come out from mid-table obscurity and potentially upset the picture. But I think York are going to take some beating. 96 points last season. They obviously had a really strong squad to begin with. Ollie Pearce was the National League's top scorer. Harrison Mail, one of the best goalkeepers. I love Joe Felix and I love Alex Hunt in midfield. Felix, of course, super versatile as well. And when you've got someone like Josh Stones, who caused Pools his fair share of problems when he was in an Oldham shirt, and they signed him, of course, for a rumoured £350,000 in January. When you've got someone like that not even getting in your team, I think that goes to show how stacked their squad is. And they've had a busy summer. Joe Gray, of course, featured from the bench at the weekend. Pools fans know all about what sort of qualities he can bring, but they've brought in Hiram Boateng, experienced midfielder from Mansfield. Greg Onley, a super player, captain of Gateshead, really popular there as well. Ash Palmer, Ollie Banks, both National League title winners with Chesterfield in the past. Mark Kitching, another name that will be familiar to Pools fans, fresh from winning promotion with Oldham as well. So I think that they are going to be really strong. The one thing that could work against them potentially, do they have too many players? I think sometimes you felt a little bit like last season, that signing of Josh Stones was a bit of a vanity project, and then manager Adam Hinshelwood had to try and fit him into his team when there wasn't really space for him. And actually York's results suffered a little bit in the second half of the campaign as a result. And Matthew Yugler, the co-owner, is certainly not shy of voicing his opinion. I think that's the only thing that could work against them, is unnecessary footballing interference, I suppose you would say. I like the look of Rochdale. I really like the look of Rochdale. I think a lot of people do. We know all about Manny Disirue's qualities. They had a strong season last season, finished fourth. I think they might be the one to progress a little bit and finish second. Carlisle had a good start to the season. Of course, you'd think they might take some time to adapt to the National League. Signed Regan Linney, who was fantastic at Altrincham. Luke Armstrong as well scored. I thought he might be on the way out this summer. Spent the second half of last season on loan at Motherwell, but he scored. Pools fans again will know what a quality player he is. And Southend, a great club. I really like Southend. They've been through some difficult times over the past 18 months. I'm sure Pools fans will look to a club like Southend and think that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Southend obviously really were at the brink of potential liquidation. I think they survived several winding up petitions just a couple of years ago. Kevin Mayer's done a brilliant job there. They've recruited a handful of really decent players. I think Sam Austin from Notts County probably the pick of those. I think Pools then have a genuine claim to be best of the rest. Forest Green will also want to be in that picture. I have to say I'm not convinced by the appointment of Robbie Savage to replace an experienced manager like Steve Cottrell with someone who's relatively unproven. Obviously achieved success with Macclesfield, got promoted to the National League North, but they had, I think, the biggest budget by quite some distance in that league, and they won it at a canter. I know he's bought a number of those Macclesfield players with him. I think there is a danger that he's over-reliant on them. They started the season with a draw against Songerhung, and I think Songerhung played with 10 men for around 84, 85 minutes, so not necessarily the most convincing start, although I think Nick Horton, who scored for Forest Green, is a wonderful player, potentially one of the best players in the division. So as I say, I think Pools have a claim to be the best of the rest. I could see them finishing somewhere between 5th and 7th. That would be a massive success. And then you asked, can Pools mix it with those sides? I mean, it will be difficult, but of course over one game. And it is challenging, especially when you have to go away from home if you do finish in those bottom couple of playoff spots. I mean, the National League playoffs are notoriously challenging, aren't they? It's really exciting. I really like the format. It obviously gives teams more opportunity. I hope in the long run we do see a second automatic promotion place. I know that the National League's 3-up campaign, they're working hard to achieve that. Probably still some way to go potentially, but certainly momentum is building. I'd really like to see that. I think you look at the teams that go up from the National League into League Two, they tend to do really, really well. And obviously, there's some obvious success stories over the last few years. Luton went from the National League to the Premier League in 10 years. Wrexham, albeit with a Hollywood budget, are now in the Championship. And you look at sides like Notts County and Chesterfield and Dave Challoner's Stockport, how well they've acquitted themselves. There's clearly not a massive gap. But over the course of 90 minutes, you just never know what can happen. I do think that this is a very capable Pool's squad. They've got players that have been there and done that before. They've got players that have won promotion from the National League. They've got good, experienced players. That's something that Simon Grayson targeted, isn't it? Is players with experience either in the National League or maybe at a slightly higher level as well. You look at some of the recruits, Alex Reed, Jay Ben, Brad Walker, they all fit that sort of bill. So there's no reason that Pools can't have a good crack at it if they do finish in the playoffs. I think everyone expected York to win the playoffs last season, didn't they? And then they lost 3-0 at home to Oldham. So it just goes to show anything can happen. But of course, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, Jack. I think we're always optimistic about the new season, pretty much no matter what has gone on before. If Pools can get into the playoffs, no matter what happens after that, I think that would really constitute significant progression and a really successful season.
Very true. And I think, to be fair, when it comes to the best of the rest, as you mentioned there, I do agree with you. I think that will be the top four in whatever order that may be. I still think York are pretty much the, let's say, clear favourites for the league. I think, I mean, I said, I don't know if it was last week or one of the other episodes we've done this season, but if they don't win the league, it is a failure with the squad that they've got. I don't think anyone would have any doubts about that. I did also throw out as well, I can't remember if I said it on air or if I said it after, but I wouldn't be surprised if York don't win the league. I wouldn't be surprised if the owner like sacks the manager before the playoffs, because it does seem like the sort of thing he'd do, doesn't it? Like we've seen some very strange actions from Matt Ugler in the past. I mean, to be fair to him, he's investing in the team, and at the end of the day, you can't really fault him for that. I just think he could do something like that if, for whatever reason, they don't win the league. Because at the end of the day, that squad, as you've said, the only real thing about that squad that could pose an issue is where to fit them all in. And on their shoulder, you've got Carlisle, you've got Southend, you've got Rochdale, whatever order they're in. I'd be very surprised if that wasn't the top four. And then after that, you mentioned not Southend, you mentioned Sutton. I think they have a very good chance, personally. There's something about them where they, of course, won the league when we went up previously from the National League, beat us 3-0 in the penultimate game to win the title that year. And they've sort of rebuilt, if you like, since coming back down. They haven't really troubled the playoffs as such. And it feels like they've recruited quite young in order to develop them. And if they can get that to click this season, I mean, 2-2 at York, albeit the opening game of the season, could very well be a harbinger of what's to come if they have anything to say about that. I think the likes of Eastleigh, you've mentioned already, some good recruitment, but the loss of Shade may well harm them there. And they did lose to Brackley on Saturday, which I don't think many people saw coming. Even though Brackley are, of course, as Pools fans will know from last season, a very good side on their day, shall we say. And I think the other one that might well be in the mix off the top of my head anyway, I think Woking may have something to say about that. I think they've got some solid players. They've kept Will Jääskeläinen in goal, which is an excellent renewal there as well. And it's that sort of club really where it is quite open after the top four, as you mentioned. Forest Green you mentioned as well. I mean, just as an off piece, it's not really relevant, but the kits, my God, they're very garish, aren't they? I think is the word for that, green and pink. I mean, it suits Robbie Savage, the way that he broadcasts these days. But yeah, I think Nick Horton is a very good signing for them. I think before he signed, I'd have still probably had them in the playoffs, but I wouldn't have been as sure. I think Horton could very well be a game changer on his own. I mean, the amount of goals he got in relegated Fylde last season tells you how good of a player he is, certainly at this level. And after that, it'll be a very interesting end to the season. On the subject of the promoted sides, because I mentioned Brackley there briefly, you have the likes of Brackley, Scunthorpe, both won on Saturday. Truro and Boreham Wood, both on the end of defeat. Boreham Wood on the end of a Manny Desirue brace, as we've already spoke about. But can you see any of those potential? Actually, I'll word the question a bit differently. Which one of those four teams has the best chance of staying up?
Yeah, good question, Jack. I did my 1 to 24 on the Hartlepool Mail. I think I did it about a week before the season, so there's one or two things I would tweak. I think I had Eastleigh finishing eighth. I maybe would drop them down a couple of places after the loss of Shade. But of the newly promoted sides, I had Scunthorpe, I think, finishing the highest. They're obviously a big club, aren't they, Scunthorpe? They certainly belong at this level. They probably belong in the Football League, to be honest. They've certainly competed there for large parts of their history. They've got a really good fan base. I think in Andy Butler, they've got a good manager as well. And I like the look of their squad. I think the sense among Scunthorpe fans is they haven't had the most tremendous summer of recruitment. Obviously, they lost someone like Maxime Coogan to Pools. That's potentially a sign of what they're working with in terms of ability to keep hold of players and obviously budget wise. I think Pools have a certainly competitive budget, but you obviously wouldn't put it in the same bracket as some of the sides that we've been discussing in terms of the promotion contenders. So you would get the sense that Scunthorpe will have to cut their cloth accordingly. But in Danny Whitehall, who I think scored on Saturday, they've got a really good striker, a seasoned campaigner. And in someone like Callum Roberts, who had a fantastic campaign last year, scored against Pools in pre-season last summer as well. I think they managed to tie him down to a new 2-year deal when the fear was he was going to leave this summer. Obviously played at a high level before, played for Notts County. He's a player that I really like. He's a real difference maker. So I'd probably give Scunthorpe a real chance of certainly surviving. I think maybe they could go even a little bit better and certainly trouble the top half potentially. Actually, when I did my 1 to 24, you usually get fans of all clubs disagreeing with where you've put them. I put Scunthorpe in the top half. I thought surely I'm safe there. Actually, I had a number of Scunthorpe fans getting in touch to disagree with me. They think their side will be lower than where I'd place them. So that was interesting. And obviously that's potentially telling. But I quite fancy Scunthorpe to do reasonably well. I put them in that bracket with sort of a Boston and an Altrincham who are, as we know, they have to work according to relative financial constraints. Altrincham obviously lost Regan Linney and Alex Newby over the summer, but you still like what they do. I think they have a good footballing identity. You'd maybe think that they might be able to potentially punch above their weight. Again, I'd put Scunthorpe in that bracket. Brackley are a club that I really, really like. They're clearly not going to have a big budget. I think it was a little bit of a surprise. They almost came from nowhere, didn't they, to win the league last year. We know all about them, as you were saying, Jack, because of their exploits in the FA Cup against Pools. Probably deserved to win the first game, didn't they? I think a late Adam Campbell goal salvaged a draw for Pools. But Pools were comprehensively outplayed in midweek in the replay. Brackley thoroughly deserved to go through. I really like Gavin Cowan, the manager. I think he speaks really well. I'm a big fan of his, and I'm a big fan of his team. Again, I think survival would constitute success for them, but I give them probably more than half a chance. I quite like Brackley's survival chances. Truro, it pains me to say it because we'd all love to see John Askey continue his remarkable success in Cornwall, the first ever Cornish side to reach the 5th division of English football. I think a lot of people will feel as though Askey got a bit of a raw deal at Pools. I think there was a lot to like about him as a person and a manager. Just circumstances conspired against him. I think particularly that bank holiday weekend when Anthony Mancini and Dan Dodds both suffered really serious injuries. It made it really difficult for him, but a good man, and I'm sure Pools fans will be delighted to see him achieve success. I just think that in terms of their geography, in terms of the budget, in terms of the fact that I don't think they really planned to win promotion last season. I think it was more about consolidation in the National League South than challenging for promotion, let alone the title. But they obviously managed to pull off a remarkable success. But I think it's going to be very, very difficult for them. Lost a couple of their star players, managed to tie down some others. I think they've gone to try and use 2-year deals to convince some of their players to stay. They have recruited a handful of players as well, but I think it's going to be tough for them. Boreham Wood, who have been a bit of a yo-yo club over the last couple of years, went down and then came straight back up. Again, I like Luke Garrard. I think he gives fourth officials a headache. Certainly, he's one of those who is not afraid of a bit of gesticulating on the touchline. I think he's a good manager. I think he's determined. He makes teams in his own image, doesn't he? Gritty, hard-working, well-organised. They've just signed Tom White after all the terrible things that are going on at Morecambe, and I think he's a pretty decent pickup for them. But nonetheless, I'd probably have them in my bottom 4 as well, Jack. I think it's going to be difficult certainly for Boreham Wood and Truro, although not impossible, I'd have to say. But Brackley and Scunthorpe, I quite fancy to stay out of it.
Yeah, I think I haven't done a 1 to 24 myself. That will be coming at some point. I'll put it down in the blog in writing. But I think Scunthorpe, I would agree. I think they'll finish the highest out of the four. I think pushing top half, if not, just edging the top half. I don't think they'll trouble the playoffs, but I think they'll be very comfortable. I think Brackley, they're very solid. I think it's one of those places, Brackley, I think, where people won't enjoy going in terms of the players. And that's nothing against the town of Brackley. That's not what I mean at all. So please don't come for me. But certainly in terms of the teams visiting the stadium, I think it'll be one of those where a bit like Stoke when they were in the Premier League and in the Championship, no one wanted to go to Stoke because it was always a very difficult game. I think it could very well be that again. And as we saw last season, and I don't know how much of this was down to Pool's defending or whether it was just, excellent stuff from Brackley, but the throw-ins that they have, certainly those missile arms, shall we say, they will certainly pose problems if they can get that right. And there's no indication to say that they won't this season. I think Truro have got to maximise their home games to have any chance. I mean, you could say that about any team in the league, in any league, but certainly with Truro's location, with the fact that a lot of teams will have to travel a long way to get to Truro, I think you've got to maximise the home games. If they don't do that, then they're in big trouble because I can't see them getting too much away from home, particularly. Not that they'll get nothing; they'll pick up points, they'll get performances, but at the end of the day, it'd be nice to see Askey keep them up. I think he'll be welcomed back quite fondly. I think time has treated him well. I think because people have got a bit of perspective on what happened while he was there. You mentioned the bank holiday game, which we're going to about Southend shortly as well, actually, because I will bring that up. But yeah, he did suffer a raw hand, and hopefully that goes well for them. And Boreham Wood were always one of those teams before they went down. They'd always survive. They'd always find a way. And then they had a couple of seasons where they were flirting with playoffs as well, if I remember rightly, because they were a very solid side. But in the end, the drop got them. And in fairness to Luke Garrard, as you've said, he got them straight back up. But yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because there are the typical teams as well that sort of hang around the zone but never really go down. The best example of that just pops into my head is Wealdstone, because they're always sort of in and around, but they never go down. Typified by last season, where of course they were very close and survived on the final day with. Who did they beat in the final day? They beat them 3-0 or something like that. Was it Halifax again?
Oh, I'm going to hand that one over to you, Jack. I don't know, but yeah, you're quite right to say that it was close at the bottom last season, wasn't it? And they did really well, as you say. Again, not a club with a big budget. They've obviously had a change of manager, haven't they? It just appointed Sam Cox and had a good start to the season. I think I had them down as fifth bottom. I think they might just scrape it. You'd imagine it'll be a season where survival is very much the aim. But as you say, they are serial survivalists, so they will fancy their chances, no doubt about that.
Yep, I've just checked. They beat Halifax 3-1 to survive, because if Dagenham had beaten Solihull, which they were for quite a long time, Dagenham would have stayed up and Wealdstone would have gone down. But Solihull equalised, and that was all she wrote. Yeah, because it was quite an interesting subplot there, wasn't it? Because Matt Taylor was manager of Wealdstone before he went to Solihull, and his Solihull side sent Dagenham down and kept Wealdstone up, which was a bit of an interesting turn of events. I think on the subject of Solihull, actually, I had them down as potential playoff contenders somewhere in the summer, because I did think that their recruitment was pretty good at the time. People have pointed out to me since, every time I bring up Solihull, that Matt Taylor isn't the best manager, for want of a better phrase. It could well be one of those where, because I'll say it every season, there's always a club that comes from nowhere that makes a run at the playoffs every season. They'll start in sort of 14th, 15th or something like that, and they'll make a run for the playoffs. Whether they get in the playoffs or not is a different matter, but they'll always put a run together. And I think Solihull, if Solihull sack Matt Taylor at some point, that could potentially be the club, because I think they've got some very good players there, and it could well be a case of he's not setting them up properly, and a new manager comes in and provides that spark for them. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's always a difficult science, because you can predict things that teams will disagree with, etc. Fans will always disagree if you put them lower than they should be in their eyes. I mean, it's a daft comparison, but if you predicted York to finish anywhere other than first, you'd get York fans in their thousands down on your heads as well. The one of the teams that we haven't mentioned, I'll tell you, actually, there's a couple that we haven't mentioned in the form of Aldershot and Tamworth, because they're very. This is going to sound harsh, but they're just there, aren't they? They're not going to go down. I think we'll both say they're probably not going to go down. Aldershot, may flirt with it. It's up by points, but they're not likely to. And Tamworth had a very solid season last season and may well be a dark horse for promotion and for playoffs potentially as well, because they are a very well run side. And Andy Peaks is an excellent manager there as well. But yeah, they're a little bit sort of there. They're not really in the discussion for either. And the other club, of course, that has gotten a lot of coverage quite recently. They probably should have got more coverage a bit earlier, but they've got a lot of coverage recently with Morecambe. And unfortunately for them, it doesn't look like, they're going to survive as of this point. They've got until next Wednesday, I believe, when the National League next meet. And if they don't provide evidence that they can complete the season, then they'll be kicked out of the league more than likely. And unfortunately, it is a real shame for Morecambe, for the fans as well, for everyone associated with the club. Radio, oh, what was the radio? Is it Lancashire over there? I can't
I
remember.
think it would be. Yeah, I think it would
BBC
be.
Lancashire, yeah. But they did some very good interviews at. I'm not sure if it was like a benefit day for Morecambe or something or other, but there was a lot of fans there, and one of the people they interviewed at the time was the kitman, Len. Oh, I can't remember his name. Len Dewhurst, I think it is potentially, but he was virtually in tears by the end of the interview because of how long he'd spent at the club and what it had done to see the club go the way that it has done, and unfortunately unless Jason Whittingham has a massive change of heart in the next 7 days, it doesn't look like they're going to survive beyond that point.
Yeah, it's a disgrace, Jack, is what it is. I mean, Jason Whittingham should hang his head in shame. It's a horrific situation happening to a really good football club, a historic football club, a big football club. As you said, the people that suffer more than anyone are the fans, but let's also not forget that all the employees of the club, not just the playing and coaching staff, but people like the kit man, people that are the heart and soul, the very fabric of the club, have been let down to an unbelievable level. And of course, a lot of the blame, almost all of the blame, it would seem, lies in the hands of one man, Jason Whittingham, who, for whatever reason, is unwilling to sell the club. It seems as though he would rather see Morecambe go to the wall, and it genuinely looks, unfortunately, like that is the likeliest outcome at this stage. It seems that he would rather see that happen than sell the club. Punjab Warriors have retained an interest in Morecambe for more than a year. They've released a series of statements saying they are ready to buy and save the club. But Jason Whittingham, for whatever reason, does not seem prepared to sit down and negotiate with them. I think they've done everything they can to try and force through a sale. There's obviously have been some interventions from the National League over the last few weeks. As you say, the press coverage has picked up over the last fortnight, 3 weeks. But of course, it's a sad story that it was ever allowed to get to this point. A lack of press coverage potentially plays a role, but it's a big concern that so much power over a situation can end up in the hands of one person. That is massively concerning. You alluded to it earlier on in the conversation, Jack, that it's not just Morecambe that this is happening to. You look at the massive issues Sheffield Wednesday. There have been loads of clubs that have really suffered through it over the last few years. Macclesfield and Bury, of course, went out of business because of the result of ruinous financial mishandling. Jason Whittingham has done something very, very similar. And it's really concerning to me that, having happened once to a side like Bury and then having happened again to a side like Macclesfield, this is being allowed to happen yet again. It looks like for a third time. A number of clubs have been through the ringer over recent years. There'll be some Morecambe fans for whom Morecambe is their life. They work all week in order to be able to go and support their team at the weekend. That is the highlight of their week every week, and it's a disgrace that is being taken away from them. Obviously, I wish Morecambe all the best. I would love to see a resolution. As you say, the time is running out. There's sort of a deadline, it would seem, of the 20th of August, certainly, when we're going to see what's going to happen next, whether they feel there is any hope that Morecambe are going to be able to potentially complete a sale, potentially complete the National League season. Of course, they're suspended from the league at the minute. Their first game against Boston was postponed as a result. We would love to see a resolution. It's just such a shame, Jack, that it's got to this point, because, as I say, Morecambe is a fantastic, a historic, and a really proud club, and it shouldn't happen to any club. It doesn't matter whether it's a big club, a small club, a medium-sized club. The fact that this is happening is an absolute disgrace, and Jason Whittingham should hang his head in shame.
Absolutely well said. And as you mentioned there as well, it will be remiss not to mention the staff who work at the club as well, the staff, the playing staff, the staff who work in the club shop, the ticket office, anywhere in that stadium as well. We've seen a lot of the playing staff leaving to, support their family, to support themselves, to be able to earn a wage as they haven't been paid for some time now as well. And with football operations shutting down at the start of last week, it very much isn't looking good. I mean, the irony is, you may well have seen that the fan engagement index came out earlier on today, in which polls were placed 106 out of 116, which is not the best reflection, shall we say. The dialogue and the transparency both scored zero out of, I believe it's out of 80, because if it's out of 240 and there's three categories, it would stand to reason that it is out of 80. But the funny thing about it is, I did have a little look, and Morecambe are 37th in that list. Out of 116, they're 37th when they're about to go to it. Just felt a bit strange to me. That felt like, I mean, all well and good that they do talk a lot, but that's because they put out a lot of club statements that mean absolutely nothing, in all honesty. I mean, Johnny Cato, if anyone's found Johnny Cato yet from a few weeks ago, feel free to, get in touch with the authorities because no one seems to know who he is. Other than that Swedish MP, I think people typed in Google and found there's a Swedish MP by the same name. I don't think he's going to be interested in Morecambe, unfortunately, but good luck to them. Like I say, it's been a very good away fixture in past years for myself, not just from a results point of view, but just in general. It's a nice enough place, and it's a nice enough stadium. It's one of those stadiums that has its charm. It's very much sort of like your League Two, lower League Two, possibly National League stadium, and unfortunately, it's just come to pass that poor mismanagement has cost them, and that's come directly from the owner. Sheffield Wednesday are another one as well who are in that sort of trouble. You look at the sliding doors moment in 2005, where obviously it could have ended differently for both clubs at the time, and they're currently in a situation. I think their North Stand has finally been cleared for use. It's taken a long time to get to that point, but just what, 3 days out? I think it was announced yesterday. So 3 days out from the game, and season ticket holders know they can finally sit in the seats. And it's just a strange situation. You've seen a lot of players from that club as well who have moved on to other things because they haven't been paid again, in the same situation that Morecambe has been in. I mean, a lot's been said about Raj Singh, about the way that he runs the club, etc. There's a lot of things that have been thrown at him. A lot of it justified, a lot of it perhaps unjustified. It's not for my place to say. However, I can't think of any time that he hasn't paid the staff of the
Well, yeah,
club.
without a doubt, Jack, without a doubt. I mean, I think the footballing authorities have a lot to answer for when you look at situations like Morecambe and Sheffield Wednesday as to exactly how it's allowed to happen in the first place. You look at someone like Jason Whittingham, given his connections to, I think, Worcester Warriors, who had some ruinous financial issues as well. How then they are allowed to pass a fit and proper persons test? At times it sort of beggars belief, doesn't it? You have to say, but I think you're right. I mean, the one thing you'd have to say about Raj Singh, I don't think anyone could argue that, is that pools have been on generally much firmer financial foundations than when he took over. Of course, when he took over, pools were in a really dire situation after IOR agreed to sell the club. They had a series of really unsuccessful owners, for whatever reason. Things didn't work out. Like a lot of Pools fans, will remember when Pools had to play in, I think it was Tranmere's away kit, despite it being a home game, because they couldn't afford the dry cleaning bill. Craig Harrison, who I got to know a bit while he was in charge of Pools, I know his wife ended up cleaning a lot of the kit. She even cooked the team meals at times because Pools couldn't afford the catering bill. So there have been some really dark times, and Raj Singh has certainly been able to provide that financial stability. Obviously, over the last 6 months, things have been a little bit precarious, not necessarily in terms of the finances, but just in terms of the way things have been going. I think a lack of footballing identity, the really wide division between the fans and the ownership, those are all big issues as well. But obviously, you have to have some firm financial foundations. I do still have concerns about the medium to long term health of the club, how everything is going to work out, whether Raj Singh at any stage is going to plan on an exit, but that's potentially a problem for another day. I think certainly Singh looks as though he's here to stay for this season. I think if Pools can achieve success, then there's no reason why he won't stay beyond that. And as you say, when you look at some of the other clubs, I think Pools are clearly in a better position than many of those. And Singh, to give him his credit, I think has put his hand in his pocket over the last few weeks to back Simon Grayson in the transfer market. I think if you were to look on paper, we've been discussing that sort of 1 to 24. I would say Pools have a top seven squad. If things go right, if players stay fit, I think Pools really have a top seven squad.
Absolutely, and hopefully success does come to the club. It doesn't really matter who's in charge of the club at that point. Obviously, we all just want the club to do well, and if that happens this season with Raj Singh in charge, then all the better. Like I say, it doesn't really matter who gets us there as long as we get there. And once we're in the playoffs, as we've already stated in this episode, anything can happen from that point. We'll take a trip to Carlisle in the semi-finals if it means that we're in it, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll be a trip to Wembley this time instead of the far-flung reaches of the UK. Not that Bristol wasn't a nice ground. Can't complain about Bristol, can't complain about Cardiff, but seeing Pools play at Wembley would be, please just let it be at Wembley. I don't have to make the joke every week about it going to Plymouth. I did it for last season and it didn't work, so let's not do that again this season. Just put it at Wembley, please. I don't think there's any major sporting events being held next summer, is there, that could move it? I really hope there isn't. I mean,
Well, we've got a long way to go before we have to worry about that, Jack. But I agree. Let's hope that it's at Wembley and that Pools are there. That would be brilliant, wouldn't it?
Very true. We'll have a moment like Norwood with Oldham last season in May. Robbie, thank you very much for joining me this week. We're still waiting on whether you'll be there on Saturday. Hopefully it works out well for you then. By the time this goes out tomorrow evening, I imagine you've probably heard something, unless communication really has gone down, in which case, all the worse for it. But I'm assuming you'll definitely be at Altrincham next Tuesday for the away games there.
Yeah, without a doubt. Looking forward to covering Pools throughout the season, Jack. So fingers crossed it's a good one.
Unless Mr. Singh has sent a letter to all of the other clubs in the league demanding that everyone with the surname Stelling be banned from grounds up and down the National League. Let's hope not, certainly for your sake, as well as Jeff Stelling's. Thank you very much, Robbie.
Thanks, Jack.